Good evening. If you are watching us live tonight, if you are in the United States, this is no doubt the midterm elections. So maybe you're taking a break from all of that and joining us tonight live. If you are catching us later on the YouTube channel, thank you for finding us. We hope we find this information to be helpful. And we're going to be talking Genesis tonight. We're going to be having some Genesis locomotives and some freight cars. But before we get started, let's go ahead and do what we always do. Let's check out who is joining us tonight. We've got John Robert Fox, Anthony, Robert, Daylight Dave, DG Model Works is in the house. Are You a Train Man Too? Ronald, Late Night Model Railroad, Tim, KBA, Donnie, Eric, Les, Brian, Rojo Railfan, Owen Eads, and Terry LaFrance, just to name a few. I want to thank you for joining us here tonight. We're going to be talking about first generation diesel power. Last week we talked about newer motive power. This week we're going to be going back to first generation diesels, and that's the GP7, EMD's first jump into the road switcher. The GP would basically set the course that other diesels would follow throughout its career, and the GP7 still soldiers on in some parts of the United States and Canada, as well as other points beyond. But before we start talking about the GP7, let's do one more round of shout-outs and see who is joining us. I have Eugene, Donnie, Lucas, Eric, Ted, Patrick. This is HO Scale tonight, Patrick. Matthew, and let's see who else is joining us. Let's see. Lucas, I see your question. We'll address that later, so hold on to that question. Andrew, Kyle, Jeff, Bradley, Frederick, Zach, Robert, and Ramsey, just to name a few. Full house here tonight. So glad that you could join us. And let's get started with Train Tuesday. And we're going to start talking about those GP7s. So many of you are probably already familiar with the GP7. It's probably, like I said earlier, the locomotive that kind of set the standard for what railroads call the road switcher. So we're going to be starting out with the GP7 in the Santa Fe, but a little background on these first. EMD introduced the GP7 back in 1949. Now, the basic design followed most diesel switchers, but with the addition of a short hood instead of an end cab, say as an SW switcher. The hoods were also full height at that time to better accommodate the diesel engine and mechanical and electrical components. Many railroads later would choose to rebuild their GP7s and GP9s for continued service. Often it was cheaper to do this rather than purchasing a brand new locomotive. And we're going to see some examples of that tonight. Certainly these locomotives probably did better even than what EMD expected. We start tonight with the Santa Fe. A little background on the Santa Fe. They like the performance of the EMD-F units. Santa Fe wanted reliable road switchers that could provide better visibility and share components with their other EMD brethren. Between 1950 and 1953, Santa Fe ordered 244 GP7s. During the 1960s, Santa Fe started to repaint their fleet of GP7s into a more simplified scheme to help on paint masking costs. They were the only purchaser of a small batch of GP7Bs and were usually mated to a like road number. So A units would have the same road number as the B units. By the 1960s, they could be found running with other units in switching assignments. In the 1970s, however, the fleet of GP7s would end up being rebuilt into GP7Us, something that we've offered in the Genesis series in the past. These included fully rebuilt cabs, electrical components, and prime movers. The B units also reserved cabs in this process. So kind of neat. They didn't stay cabless for long. By the 1970s, many of them received their own cabs and became an independent locomotive. The first one that we're showing here, this is a mid 1970s. This is part of the Prime for Grime. It's non-dynamic brakes, late pre-rebuild faded version. So the blue and the yellow are going to be substantially faded from a recent repaint. It's also going to feature late coupler levers with notched pilots, the can style antenna with the stand on the right side of the cab. Now again, this is Prime for Grime, and this is unit number 2698 as it appeared in the mid 70s. The unfortunate thing about that Santa Fe color, or the billboard, bookend, whatever you choose to call it, paint scheme looked great when they were new, but they did tend to fade out. Now up next we have 2742. This is a 1960s version. Non-dynamic brakes, repaint with yellow handrails and blue stanchions, full footboards, can antenna with the stand on the left side of the cab. So 1960s, a little bit earlier. You could certainly, with some weathering, run these reliably into the 1970s on your layout. Here's 2819. This is again another 1960s, non-dynamic brakes, repaint with blue handrails and yellow ends, full footboards, can antenna with stand left side of the cab. Now remember we were talking about the B units earlier, and we are offering the B units. Now here you have 279 1A. Now this one here is as it appeared in the 1970s. This will have dynamic brakes, repaint with the yellow handrails and blue stanchions, and we'll have full foot boards. Now one of the things that we are going to do with these, Santa Fe was known for changing out spark arresters, and because of that, we've included them in a poly bag for you, the modeler, to install, depending on your modeling era. These appeared with and without spark arresters throughout their life in this paint scheme. So we've decided to include those as an extra detail part that you can add should your era have those represented on your locomotive. Now, these are features that are standard just for the Santa Fe units. They're going to include the early Leslie Dual Blatt style horns. If you've heard one of those, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's two different Santa Fe lettering styles, correct parts placement per road number. Santa Fe spark arresters are provided separately in a poly bag, like I said. And the sunshades on these are canvas. Now, here's one I know some of you guys in the room are going to be pretty excited about because we had a lot of people asking for these. Now, if you remember back July or August, we had sent out a survey. And in that survey, we said, hey, we're wanting to do another run of GP7s. What roads would you like to see? Now, of course, we got a lot of great feedback on our product suggestion email. And we also sent out a survey. And overwhelmingly, these Conrail units were actually one of the most requested roads. Now, in 1976, the federal government created the Consolidated Rail Corporation, or Conrail, to assume control of several bankrupt and financially struggling eastern roads. Among these was the bankrupt Reading Company, whose railroad assets were sold to Conrail on April 1st, 1976. Part of this acquisition was a group of 17 EMD GP7s. While several units were put to work immediately with patch numbers and logos, others were repainted into Conrail's medium blue scheme. Although, at this early period of Conrail, there were considerable variations from unit to unit. This group of 3 former Reading GP7s feature a variety of detail and artwork differences and will be right at home running with rebuilt Alcos and other Jeeps during the early Conrail operations. And so that's what we're offering. Here's number 5831. This is based on 1976 on up. This unit here has footboard pilots. It has the early repaint it doesn't have the can opener scheme. It's just the early repaint, no can opener logo. Up next is 5834. You'll see there's a little bit of a difference here. This is 1978 on up, and it has a unique non-standard Conrail font on the sides. Take a look at it here real quick. I'll zoom in. Definitely not your standard Conrail, although it does have the can opener paint scheme. But again, early days of Conrail, they weren't quite as homogenized as some of us younger guys may remember. Now, we worked with Dave Abeles, who is a Conrail modeler, has been published numerous times in many publications. We want to thank him for helping us with these models. Without his help, we couldn't have done it. So, Dave, thank you for your help, and we'll probably hear from Dave in a future video when we talk specifically about these. Up next is Conrail number 5839. This is a late 1970s former passenger unit with no dynamic brakes, and it retains the underframe water tanks. This is an early repaint without the can opener logo. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about is the Conrail features specific for these locomotives. These are former Reading repaints, and that's the first time in Genesis. Some of the details that these have never been offered before in Genesis. Mostly similar spotting features close to the Reading units that we'll also be talking about tonight. They're all going to have the Leslie S3L horn. They all run long hood forward. So that's something to keep in mind. Reading ran their Jeeps long hood forward. Well, when Conrail got them and repainted them and did some other work on them, they kept them as a long hood forward operation. These will have different wheel bearing styles per the prototype and different fuel tank capacities per the prototype. Another road that we got a lot of requests for, and we've thought, it'd probably be best for us to do Western Pacific again. Now, when the Western Pacific purchased their first GP7s in 1952, they became the first Western Class 1 railroad to fully dieselize their locomotive fleet. With a number of F7s already in use on the railroad, the Western Pacific looked to the GP7 as a more versatile choice to expand its diesel roster and get the last of their steam locomotives off the rails. Since the GP7 was nearly identical mechanically to the F7s, it was the logical next step and an attractive advantage to the budget-minded WP. The railroad took delivery of 9 GP7s in 1952 with an additional 4 in 1953. With this, the days of steam on the Western Pacific were over, and a new chapter of railroading in the Feather River Canyon began. Now, we're offering 3 Western Pacific GP7s as they appeared in the 1952-1953 era. The 3 road numbers that we're offering in this run, and these are factory fresh locomotives, is 702, 704, and 711, and that really attractive Western Pacific paint scheme. Now, some of the features specific to these locomotives, they're all going to feature the dynamic brakes, canvas style sunshades, which was pretty much standard at that time, full skirting, high MU stands, and the biggest thing that stands out on the WP units is the Pyle National barrel style headlights. You can see that pretty obvious right here. There's your mounted MUs and full skirting. As time would go on into the 60s and 70s, many railroads would remove a lot of this just for maintenance reasons. Made maintenance on these a lot easier to have that skirting out of the way. But since these are, as they appeared from their delivery date, 52, 53, they're going to be factory fresh. So we talked about the Reading earlier, and this is another road we have not done before. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of guys asking for the Reading in general. This is a railroad that if you're from the Midwest, you'll pronounce it Reading, but that's incorrect. I guess I'll blame Monopoly for that. It is indeed called the Reading. Think of it as the color red. At the end of 1952, the Reading's road freight operations were about 65% dieselized. The road continued to push towards full dieselization and ordered 28 GP7s in 1953. These came painted in the carrier's standard dark green paint scheme with yellow trim. These also, of course, as we mentioned earlier, these were set up to run long hood forward. The units also had long careers on the Reading, with 17 of them lasting until the 1976 creation of Conrail, and several others finding new homes on other railroads. So we're offering 3 different road numbers here as they appeared when they were factory fresh, delivered 1952 to 1953. So the first one that you see here, we have 617. Now keep in mind, they run long hood forward. Here is 626 and 629. Now, one of the things that we have not offered with the earlier releases of GP7s is this right here. This handrail is unique to the Reading. And of course, the Conrail units will have that. We've never offered that before. That's one of the new details that we've added for this run. And again, this was based on your feedback. So for all you Reading guys out there, especially if you're modeling the 1950s, here you go. Now here is a railroad that just seems to get a lot of feedback on social media and anytime we post something. So one of the things that I want to start by saying is the artwork that you're going to see here is not indicative to the finished product. Since we have put these pictures up, my historical society, the Boston and Maine Historical Society, in conjunction with some key folks at the Boston and Maine Historical Society, as well as other enthusiasts from with Maine Central background, have contacted us and have helped us extensively with these models. The first thing that I know a lot of folks have been asking about is the Harvest Yellow, Harvest Gold color that we're going to paint these. These are going to be based on actual documents and paint chips that we have received from Maine Central enthusiasts. I realized the first run, the colors were not quite right. We have made every effort to make those colors right, as well as how the markings on these locomotives are. Those have all been vetted through the different folks that we have contacted and have contacted us. Many of you have contacted us through our product suggestion email, which we thank you for that. Your feedback is critical on things like this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It is impossible for every Athearn developer to know every single locomotive that was ever produced by any manufacturer that ran on any railroad that had any paint scheme at any one given time. There's a lot of info here, and Maine Central was famous for changing parts out at different times. We'll talk a little bit about that going forward, but the first Maine Central locomotive that we're featuring is number 563. Now 563, this is a mid-1970s paint scheme. This one is unique. If you do a quick search and look up other Maine Central GP7s and this Harvest paint scheme, you'll notice that the logos are different. They're more of a solid pine green, whereas this one is an open Maine Central. This was the only one to have that type of logo. And again, the new color formulation, it's going to be based on all of the information that we've received from historical societies and enthusiasts. I'll try to zoom in on this logo that you can see here. Typically, that logo would just be solid green like a billboard with the Maine Central parts in white. 563 was the only one to have this particular logo on this particular paint scheme. Now, a series of locomotives from Maine Central that we have not done before, this is called the simplified paint scheme. This is the first time we've ever offered it with the GP7s and Genesis. We did the pine green with the multi-stripe, but we've not done the simplified green. Now, for those keeping track, Maine Central and Boston and Maine, they were pretty much tied at the hip when they ordered their GP7s early on in 1950 and 1953. So both Boston and Maine Central ordered their GP7s with the EMD paint scheme. It was basically an engine maroon with a deluxe gold multi-stripe. Only differences being is that Boston and Maine had a Minuteman, whereas the Maine Central had the pine tree. It was around the later 1950s into the early 60s, Maine Central distanced themselves somewhat from Boston and Maine. they kept the paint scheme the same, but they went to a pine green versus the engine maroon. Much later, into the mid 60s, into the late 60s, the simplified green paint scheme was introduced. Now, again, there's different versions of this paint scheme, but 564 and uh, subsequent one after this, they are the same paint scheme as far as the markings and things of that nature. Now, these originally came out in the late 1960s. Interesting thing about these locomotives is 564, which we see here with the nose bell, when it was originally introduced in its new paint scheme, it did not have that nose bell. They got the nose bell sometime later in the 70s. Now, here's 566, same thing. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out for you too. If you saw our ad in one of the magazines, we talked about new tooling. There are going to be new tooling, and they're heavily involved with the main central. The main central is going to include its own high mount MU stands. It's also going to have some other things that we're going to be talking about in an upcoming Athearn Extra. So if you're a main central person, you have probably been waiting for these for a while. And I guarantee you, we've gotten a lot of feedback on these. We know these are important to you. We want to make it right the first time. So we have been conducting a lot of work with those historical societies and with those involved with the main central. All right, so we're going to stop there for a second, and we're going to see if there's any questions before moving on to our next item. So I'm going to look through here. So I'm going to skip over a lot of what you guys are saying. Hey, can you do this paint scheme? Can you do that paint scheme? What you're going to want to do is rather than just putting it in comments, put that in an email and send it to our product suggestion email and let us know. So like Ryan, yep. So your best point of reference, Ryan, is to send us an email. And that way it goes right to product development. Yeah, it really is. And as a New Englander, living in the very end of Boston and Maine, I had to say that Maine Central was a little bit classier looking than the tired, worn out Boston and Maine and some of the other railroads that were running around at that time. As I understand it, most of these GP7s and 9s, high hoods ran long hood forward if they could help it. Not just the Conrail. Apparently, operator visibility was better long hood forward somehow. Depended on the railroad. Same thing could be said about Alco RS3s. Boston and Maine would run theirs long nose forward, whereas Delaware and Hudson would be the opposite. It really depended on the railroad. They could order them from the EMD to operate either way. There was even some that had dual controls. But that is something that kind of depends on the railroad. I know a lot of the old hands, as you'd say, preferred to run long hood forward because it was a lot like the steam locomotives they ran that these locomotives actually replaced. Let's see. Looking mainly for a lot of good comments on the WP. Yeah, those Western Pacific locomotives are sharp. They are really cool setup. Let's see what else we've got. I'm going back a little bit. Eugene's pretty happy about those Conrails. Looks like Jeff is too. Let's see if we've got any comments on Eugene's liking the Booster, yeah. GP7 booster, actually. Or the B unit. Scott, I think you're referring to the RF-16s, and we don't have those, but who knows? You never know what development is working on. I'm glad you think so, because hopefully this run of GP7s kind of helps you out. All right, one more question or comment on the GP7s, and then we're going to move on to the next item. Let's see what else. More Illinois Central Gulf stuff. Yeah, stay tuned, Andrew. One of the advantages of Athearn being in central Illinois, we're right next to, I'd say Athearn is probably, Athearn and Horizon Hobby are our corporate headquarters. We're probably less than a mile from the Illinois Central Champaign yard. So you never know what we're going to come up with. All right, let's talk a little bit about our next item, and that is the Genesis PC&F 50-foot freight cars, box cars. And this time with the 8-foot by 8-foot Youngstown doors. A little background on these. Starting in the 1960s, insulated box cars started to become common on most railroads. This type of car was useful for hauling canned goods or other commodities that need to be protected from temperature extremes. The models depicted by this Athearn Genesis car were built by Pacific Car and Foundry and features different side panel construction and door types per the prototype. The cars are also feature a detailed cushion underframe and full brake rigging. These are beautiful cars. If you've not seen these in person, absolutely beautiful. They've got the full brake detail on them. If you've got an industry on your layout that is a temperature sensitive item, these are perfect for that. And we've got a little bit of different roads and eras, but if you're a Southern Pacific fan, your prayers have been answered, because here we have one of 3 different versions that we're doing. So what we've got here, this is Southern Pacific car number 291754. This is based on a 1970s paint scheme, and we're offering this particular paint scheme in 2 different road numbers. Slightly different variation. I'll flip them back again so you can see. You kind of have a more school book type font, and you go to a more modern sans serif style. Okay, this one is going to be rather unique. So you guys that are Southern Pacific fans, this is again car number 292841, 1970s version. We're only doing 1 road number in this car. So you'll definitely want to pre-order this guy. Just 1 road number in this paint scheme. And then for the guys that are modeling the late 1970s, again, another variation on a theme. We go back to that almost typewriter style font, and the Hydra cushion is gone like it was in the previous. Now it's a cushion car. Now this is car number 292655. This is based on late 1970s, and there's 3 different road numbers for this car. You can certainly justify running these into the early 80s. No issues whatsoever. Then we've got Evergreen. Now this one was very popular, and every time we've released this car, it's been extremely popular. They tend to sell out quick. This is based on a late 1960s paint scheme. This is Evergreen car number 3648. This particular paint scheme of Evergreen, we're going to offer this in 6 different road numbers, so you can build your fleet up. Honestly, we've done this in 1 or 2 road numbers in the past, and they sell out quickly, very quickly. So this time we're offering it in 6 different road numbers. And then the last car to show, one that overwhelmingly we get a lot of requests for, this is a data-only car. You guys that are modeling more into the 90s and above have been requesting these for quite a while. So here you go. This is a data only, no number. Now the features on these cars are going to have separate wire form grab irons. They're all going to have metal edged coupler platforms, and where applicable, metal roof walk. Like I said earlier, they got full underframe detail, which includes the air brake reservoir, control valve, and brake cylinder with plumbing and brake rod details. Like I said, I've got a few of these and they're just amazing. They look great on the layout. Of course, they're all going to be weighted to NMRA standards, and they're going to have all of the grab irons are going to be separate. The trucks will feature animated rotating bearing caps, and you'll also have features like coupler lift bars, trainline hoses, brake hoses, and hardware. Minimum radius on these is 18 inches. Of course, they're going to have metal wheel sets and the McHenry couplers, and price on these is $49.99 individually. Now, keep in mind, that is not the price that you're going to pay at your hobby shop. That is just a suggested retail. So you have until the day after Thanksgiving. If you're an American and you celebrate that holiday, you have the day after, Friday, the 25th, to place your pre-orders. For you guys up in Canada that already had your Thanksgiving, you don't have to worry. You just have to remember November 25th is when the due date is to get these pre-orders in. Everything that we've talked about, GP7s and these really nice box cars. Now, last but not least, and then we'll go to a few questions, I wanted to remind you all that I am busy getting ready for Train Fest, trying to get the booth put together and getting everything ready to go. Myself and Mark Williams, the category manager of Athearn Model Trains, will be attending Train Fest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin this weekend. Now, this is going to happen during November 12th and 13th, and our booth will be aisle 210, area F and G. So stop by, check out the new models, and you know what? I'm going to have a surprise for you guys. Product development is sending a really special package to our hotel room, and we're going to unveil something that none of you have seen before. It's all brand new. So be sure to stop by the booth. I'm sure there's going to be an announcement made. N-Scale guys, you're definitely going to want to be in attendance for this because we're showing something all new that hasn't been seen before. So once again, Train Fest happening this weekend. Please stop by, say hi, pick up a sticker sheet, check out the new stuff that we're going to be talking about. We're going to have stuff that's currently in stock, and we're going to have some things that aren't in stock just yet. You're going to get a first look at them. And like I said, we're going to have stuff that you haven't seen before. All right, so we got time for a few questions, and then I will let you guys get back to it. Zach, you know what I'm going to say. If you have a product suggestion, please, 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 please go to our website. Go to athearn.com, go to the Contact Us page, select the link that is Athearn Product Suggestions at athearn.com. Fill it out. Give us an email. Let us know what you want. A lot of the GP7s that we showed you tonight were based on your feedback. Will the GP7s have working ground lights? No, not in this run. PN Green 1970 says, Jim, nice to see Athearn doing the wheel inspection dots on the late 70s car. It's a nice touch that defines that time period. Yeah, absolutely. If you're like me, if you're modeling the 1970s into the early 1980s, that really does set the tone, just like ACI labels do. And believe it or not, we put those on N-Scale as well. That's not a detail just for Genesis. We also put those on our N-Scale box cars if it's applicable, and it really does help set the scene. You don't want modern graphics on a car that you're trying to represent 1970s. Glenn probably doesn't realize I'm still working on this. He says, why don't you have trains running behind you, Jim? Some big BN locos would look outstanding on a coal train behind you. Well, I don't have that kind of room, Glenn. Unfortunately, this is a shelf switching layout. It only encompasses about 8 feet in one direction and 9 feet in the other in an L formation and HO scale. And it's something I started working on in August. It comes in handy as a backdrop for the different shows that we do. And as time progresses, you'll see it start to take shape. And it'll also be a great way to show off the new Athearn HO products as they come out. Dalton, yes. When, I don't know. I don't have an ETA on that, but we will definitely be doing those again. Any update on delivery for the MKT GP38s? Last I checked, we should, if everything goes correctly. We're working with our shipping. I'm hoping the end of December, maybe early January. It's something that we're kind of watching, though. I don't have a firm date for you yet. We're kind of at the mercy of the shippers. As soon as shipping lets that go, then we can probably give you a better date. But I'm thinking probably late December, early January of 2023. Western Maryland chop noses. Boy, those would be cool, wouldn't they? Especially in the Genesis. If you don't know what he's talking about, do a quick search. Really cool chop nose, number boards on the chop nose, whereas most railroads like ICG got rid of the number boards and put them on the cab. Western Maryland kept them on the nose. Kind of a cool locomotive, and trust me, it's come across conversations before. Let's see what else we have. We always talk about Genesis, and I don't blame you. What about some other stuff? Well, Winona, this typically Train Tuesday is the first episodes of the month. We do talk about Genesis. Next week, next Tuesday, we'll be talking more about Athearn. Now, the Athearn line and HO and N scale is more of the everyday modelers' models. They're going to have just enough detail to satisfy you without going to the actual specific details of a specific locomotive and a specific time that Genesis does. We'll be talking about some of those next week. I've been productive require in for SD50s, SD50s, SD40Es, there's a laundry list that he's got here the past few months. I hope other people are requesting them as well, or else my efforts are in vain. So thank you for your comments and sending those in. One thing I did want to remind you, and it seems to be a polarizing subject, we do talk about the product suggestion email quite a bit. But keep in mind that if you put that email in, it does not guarantee that we're going to produce that specific locomotive. If you say, Jim, I really want a Chicago Northwestern Bicentennial, and you put that in there and you're the only guy that comments on it, we're probably not going to make it, because as many times as I've told you that a lot of us here at Athearn are modelers, we still got to pay to keep the lights on and keep our guys employed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do that. Now, that doesn't also mean that just because you don't hear from us, we're not going to produce it. Pretty much the product suggestion email is a collection point for developers to look at. When it comes time to produce new models, we look into that. So we're not always going to respond to your requests, and try not to take it too sensitive. It's one of those things where we're just collecting responses, and when we get enough responses for specific models, specific roads, then we'll end up building it. But don't feel like we're slighting you if you don't get an answer or we don't produce the road that you're looking for. JD wants to know, what if the individual is blind, deaf, and can't type? Do we still have to use the Athearn product suggestion email? Well, yeah, you're kind of limited. And if you can, JD, if you've got somebody that can help you with that request, I'm sure somebody in your family or maybe one of your railfan friends or modeler friends would be more than happy to help you. Submit that email. That is the direct line to product development. And yeah, just like I said earlier, you're not going to get a response. That's just a collection point. So don't feel bad if you don't get a response. All right. Randall with a nice comment says, I really like the horn casting you guys have. They look awesome. Thank you, Randall. Appreciate that. All right. All right. Well, I think that is everything. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight on the live feed. If you're watching us from the YouTube channel, thanks for finding us. Again, don't forget Train Fest. It's going to be West Allis, Wisconsin, just outside of Milwaukee, this coming weekend. It's going to be a great show. This show hasn't been attended to for the last few years for various reasons, one of them being a pandemic. But we're back, and there's going to be a lot of great stuff there. I already know there's going to be a lot of great layouts. If you were involved with any one of those modular layouts, please, please, please stop by the booth, introduce yourself. I'd love to see what you guys are working on. And of course, I'm going to get ideas for my home layout. So until I see you either at Train Fest or next Tuesday, I want to wish you all happy modeling. Be safe, be happy, be healthy, and above all, high greens, everyone. Good night.